This is Chatter. I'm Shane Harris. This week, journalist Jim Popkin on Ana Montes, America's most dangerous female spy.
You know, I make the argument that she's really one of the most dangerous women spies in U.S. history, but also just one of the most damaging spies, period. Say what you will about her crime, she has done hard time. She lived close to Squeaky Fromm of Manson family fame, an al-Qaeda terrorist, and she described it as living in an insane asylum. You know, I have letters that she wrote in prison much more recently. She is not apologetic. She has not changed her stripes at all. She continues to justify what she did and why she spied.
Jim Popkin, welcome to Chatter. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And you're in the studio. We are in the studio together. We rarely get to do these in the studio these days, so I'm glad that we can actually be face-to-face.
Absolutely.
This is great. So we're talking on, this is an auspicious week. You have a new book that just came out yesterday. We are talking on Wednesday, January 4th, for people paying attention at home. The book is Codename Blue Wren, The True Story of America's Most Dangerous Female Spy and the Sister She Betrayed. And that spy, people may remember this name, but I'm suspecting a lot of people might not. It was a woman named Ana Montes who spied for Cuba and is slated to be released from prison this week, right?
Yeah, amazing. After more than 21 years in jail, she's scheduled to get out this weekend as early as Friday.
Wow. And so she's been serving time. She's in Texas now.
Yeah, she's at the Carswell facility in Fort Worth.
Got it. And she was a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst on Cuba. We're going to get into her background and what she did. Let's actually start kind of at the end of her story for people who may not be familiar with Ana Montes or remember the name, but she has been locked up for more than 2 decades. Remind us who she was and why she went to prison.
Sure. So Ana Montes, first, is an American woman. She grew up in Topeka, Kansas, and then just outside Baltimore, and went to school at UVA, and then went to graduate school in D.C. at Hopkins at SICE, and got radicalized there. She, I don't want to skip too far ahead, but she ended up at, as you said, Shane, at the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I always need to explain a little bit what that is.
Yeah, for people who don't, it's not the CIA.
Right, but it's, in a way, it's the CIA for the military. They do intelligence reports on militaries around the world, and they're the ones, in fact, right after 9/11, that had plans for, if we were to invade Afghanistan, here's where we would go, and other countries as well. So it's a very important agency. Today, they have about 16,000 employees, so it's a big deal. So Ana joined the DIA. No one knew it at the time, but she was already a fully recruited Cuban spy at that moment. And she stayed with them for 17 years, nearly 17 years, rose up the ranks, was incredibly successful as an analyst at DIA and really one of the government's top Cuba experts. And, unfortunately, was sharing this classified information the entire time with Cuba. And we'll get into it with her family, but it's an amazing story because her family, 4 of her family members, worked for the FBI during this entire period.
Amazing. The people who are the Bureau, of course, the one that is hunting for the mole that they think exists that's spying for Cuba at this time, and it's their sister. As the lead analyst for DIA and Cuba, talk a little bit about what she did, what her responsibilities were, and what access that gave her to information that she shared with Cuba.
She started her career focusing on El Salvador and Nicaragua. And that's important in the context because she was really opposed to the Reagan-era policies in Central America. So she started that way, worked her way up, won all kinds of accolades and awards, and ultimately ended up as a Cuba analyst. And that meant that she was responsible for understanding the military, the politics in Cuba, and really, a ground-level view of what their capabilities were. It's helpful to do that if you have a back door and you're getting information from the Cubans the entire time. So she was a very successful analyst and thought to be, one of the best in the nation within the U.S. government, and was called somewhat derisively the Queen of Cuba for her knowledge base of all things Cuba.
And so she really is sort of the point person for DIA in that regard, and would have had access to, some of the most classified information, if not the top classified information that we had on the Cuban military, the Cuban capabilities, that kind of thing.
Yeah, she had legal access and almost carte blanche access to classified information, not just that was the purview of the DIA, but also CIA and many other agencies. They had an electronic system, the acronym was SAFE, S-A-F-E, that gathered up raw intel from around the intelligence world, and she had legal and permissible access to that. What she would do and what she was masterful at was taking a look at this data every day, all kinds of classified memos and raw intel, and memorizing it. She had a good memory, not off the charts, but a good memory, and she worked at it. I found a book of hers at her sister's house on improving your memory. And she used that to great effect. She basically had two jobs. She had her day job, which she'd be at DIA. She'd get there at 9, stay till 5 like clockwork. She'd work right through lunch at her desk, reading, memorizing. She didn't take documents out of the building, unlike, say, a Robert Hansen, the FBI agent turned Russian spy. She kept it almost entirely in her head. Then her night job began when she got back to her apartment in the Cleveland Park area, D.C., and there she would type in her notes from everything she'd learned that day that she found relevant into her Toshiba laptop, and it was encrypted. And she'd put it on disks, and then every couple weeks, she would take that and pass it to a Cuban handler at a restaurant in D.C. So it was a very efficient way to transmit massive amounts of classified data to the Cubans on a regular basis. She was really good at her job.
And you have to be I find this part fascinating about her character, that the level of, I guess, discipline and commitment that you'd have to not only just, first of all, to commit espionage, but to sit there memorizing these documents and to go home and kind of spit them out again. And they were fairly accurate, right? She was doing a good job of transmitting the information she memorized accurately.
One of the things the Cubans liked about her was that she had the kind of seniority and smarts to be able to separate what was truly important from what she learned, because you could just spit back all kinds of raw intel that was not that interesting, but she had the knowledge base to figure out this is truly important and this will help you. And so there was a lot of analysis that she did both for the U.S. and for the Cubans. She was really an analyst for the Cubans as well in terms of what she perceived to be truly important for them.
So she could tell them things. In other words, it wasn't just, here's what we know about what you're doing and how we're collecting information about your military and your secrets, but she could sort of lend her expertise in these matters to them.
Precisely, yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you mentioned when she's in school and she gets radicalized. Let's talk about a little bit about where that begins for her before she actually gets recruited by the Cuban government. What's her experience like that turns her kind of, I guess we would call her, a socialist radical? Is that the best way to think about her and on the spectrum?
Yeah, I think so. But let me pull back just a little bit and talk about her family for a second.
Yeah.
Her father, Alberto, was a physician. He was a doctor. And he started off with the U.S. Army. He's born in Puerto Rico, very bright guy and a very good student. Got a scholarship, went to school in the U.S., and ended up as a physician first in Germany, and that's actually where Ana and her sister Lucy were born, on a military base. They come to the U.S. and they first kind of land in Topeka, Kansas. And that's where Ana spends her early life. But it's important to me to think of her earliest impression of her father in a military uniform. He ultimately retired as a colonel in the Army and became a psychiatrist. He's a Freudian psychiatrist. But in the Army, he was a physician. Her father was a very difficult, brilliant but difficult guy who was both physically and emotionally abusive to the kids. And not just their family. He had a second wife, and the pattern continued with the second family. He would beat the kids with a belt. He had a nasty temper and was mentally abusive. One quick anecdote, Ana had asthma as a child and was allergic to everything from Christmas trees to pollen, etc. And she was about 7 and having an attack. And her father brought her into the room, 2 chairs across from each other, and she's gasping for breath. And he decided to try to treat her as a psychiatrist and to calm her down that way, but without helping her medical condition. And Sister Lucy, who's just about a year and a half younger than Ana, is watching this and watching her sister gasp for breath. And it was a show of dominance and control, not parental love. And that's just an example of how the father treated them. They also just lived in fear of him because he would get the belt out quite a lot, slap them. It continued through teenage years. So Ana grew up with a, kind of a love-hatred of her father who was in the military. And I think that really had an influence on her. Later, and I didn't mention her mother. Her mother's name is Amelia, very, very bright and accomplished woman. Later went to work for the U.S. government in a variety of jobs in the Baltimore area, but really smart, well-read, good writer. Politically liberal, but not to the extent that Ana was.
Right.
Ana went to the University of Virginia, and that was important for her because her junior year she spent it in Madrid during a period of kind of social upheaval in Spain.
This would have been like in the 70s?
Correct. She met a lot of pretty radicalized folks there at the time, Spaniards. She also fell in love with an Argentinian named Ricardo, who was a kind of revolutionary himself. And they challenged each other. I interview a friend of Ana's who was there on this junior year abroad, and she's also an American but of Puerto Rican descent, and she said it was intense, and Ana was conflicted. She wanted to be one of the cool kids and kind of a revolutionary, but was an American. Her dad was in the military, and she was kind of caught in the middle between these worlds. But that was very important for her. It helped to shape her politics. So that's college, right? Young person. Then she joined the Justice Department. She was in the Freedom of Information Act office, but she had a clearance, at the security clearance at that point. And then she decided to go to graduate school. Her graduate school was with Hopkins. It's called SICE, their international studies school.
Renowned school, yeah.
Yes, not far from here on Massachusetts Avenue. And it's the Reagan years. Reagan is meddling in Central America in a number of conflicts, and it was extremely upsetting to her and many of her classmates. Yeah. So that was kind of the environment at SICE at the time. And to get back to your question, how did she get radicalized and then recruited? What happened at SICE was she met a woman named Marta Velazquez. Marta, really bright, accomplished woman, born in Puerto Rico, educated at Princeton, Georgetown Law School, and then SICE. Imagine those tuition bills.
Amazing.
And while she's at SICE, she meets Ana, and Ana's outspoken about her views, as most of the students are at the time. and they're simpatico. They get along and they share the same political point of view. Ana presumably did not know it, but Marta Velázquez already was a recruited Cuban agent at that point. Her senior year at Princeton as an undergrad, she'd gone to Cuba as part of her thesis and likely met Cuban intelligence officers, or they were at least aware of her at that time. She was later indicted. It was secret for a while, but then released in, I think, 2013. So that's where we know this. So she's not been convicted, but she has been indicted by the Justice Department. And it revealed that she had gone to Mexico City and she'd met with Cuban intelligence officers already by the point that she was in graduate school. So the thought is that her role was maybe kind of as a spotter at that point to find new talent. And Ana is perfect. She's perfect for the Cubans. She's a leftist. She can't stand the Reagan administration. From Puerto Rico, which is important. There's a history of leftism and a separatist movement within Puerto Rico. Outspoken, and bonus points, she has a clearance, a security clearance. She's already at DOJ.
Right.
So put that all together, she was absolutely perfect for them and also spoke Spanish.
Yeah.
So Marta befriends her. I don't know if that was genuine or not, but she befriends her. They become inseparable. She met Ana's family. I have a photo of Marta at Sister Lucy's wedding shower. And she became part of the Montes crew and then takes her in 1984 to New York on Amtrak, and they go out for a meal and they meet a Cuban intelligence officer. And he makes his pitch and Ana is in. She agrees to spy on behalf of Cuba. Now, at the time, because of what was happening in Central America, the thought was that she was going to help them with El Salvador and Nicaragua, those conflicts, and help the Cubans in that sense. But she was fully in. Ana and Marta in 1985 take a trip to, call it, don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but it's like a girls' trip. Mm-hmm. That's how they pose it as, to Cuba. And they go through first Spain and then Prague. And in each of those stops, they're meeting Cuban operatives who give them new fake passports, travel clothes, different travel clothes, and then a Cuban travels with them from Prague to Havana. Once in Havana, it's Spy 101 classes, and they learn how to communicate by shortwave radio, how to find out if someone is following you, countermeasures, and Ana asks, I need to learn how to defeat a polygraph. And she's taught ways to defeat a polygraph, which comes in handy later. And so they do this, and they come back to the States, and then the Cubans at that point encourage her to apply to the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and other places. And ultimately, she's admitted into the DIA and begins her career.
You know, if people didn't realize it yet, from your description of how she was recruited, they would conclude correctly the Cubans run a very good intelligence service. It's really a world-class service, deep connections historically to the Soviet Union, KGB, that kind of thing. I mean, they must have just seen in her an absolute gold mine. I mean, where does she rank, to the extent that we know, in terms of, the best agents the Cubans had? Was she really right up there at the top and one of the best people they had in the U.S. government?
Definitely, yeah. She's at the top, if not the top agent that they were running that we know of anyhow.
Yeah.
One of the clever things that they did, and I agree with you, Shane, they really are good, right? Cuba's not militarily, they're not a threat at all to the United States, but in terms of their intelligence agencies, they're phenomenal, very crafty. They don't spend a lot of money, but they're really very competent at what they do. One of the clever things they did early on was to encourage Ana to write an autobiography. which Marta helped her with. I think Marta lent her typewriter to tell you the era that we were in. But she writes out an autobiography, which is helpful in 2 counts. One, if Ana ever got cold feet, we've got an autobiography. We could share that. It would be very damaging to provide to others. Number 2, it's a roadmap of her life that the Cubans can use for years to manipulate her. And they did. They understood what buttons to push and how to keep her in the game and successful. That was a very useful tactic for them.
And it seems like, she is someone she's ideologically committed, but maybe doesn't fully appreciate the degree to which she is just being very manipulated by, look, I'm sure the Cuban intelligence service is also ideologically committed to its cause, but they're really using her in a way that she almost presented to me as somebody who was almost naive in her ideological commitments and maybe didn't fully understand the way that it was. Yeah, you may have this idea about helping, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, but the Cubans have their own agenda for you.
Right.
And that's nice that you have your opinions and your views, but they have plans for you and you're an asset.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, her family believes that she was manipulated, but for that, she probably would not have jumped in. I'm not sure. It's hard, it's hard to assess that. It is true probably that early on that is the case, but then you look at later in life, she knows exactly what she's doing. Later, she was helping she's a Cuba expert providing information on Cuba from classified U.S. sources to Havana. And I have letters that she wrote in prison much more recently. She is not apologetic. She has not changed her stripes at all. She continues to justify what she did and why she spied. And so it's hard for me to see her as a naive person now. She may have been, when she started, she was 27 years old. She maybe didn't fully realize that this is a lifetime decision that she was making. And it's interesting, we get to this later, but she fell in love with someone who, and at one point wanted to get out of the game and learned that she couldn't.
I mean, she just seems incredibly tough. I mean, maybe this is the upbringing, maybe it's, the abusive father, but this incredibly resilient person too. You used her superpowers for bad, perhaps, but she comes across that way, as well. When she starts spying for them and she's in DIA, talk about some of the things that she is giving them, particularly the things that are so damaging that she's providing to the Cubans.
I make the argument that she's really one of the most dangerous women spies in U.S. history, but also just one of the most damaging spies, period. And, I'm basing this on a lot of experts in the government who've shared this with me. There are a couple of reasons why. Number one, she provided the real identities of Americans operating undercover in Havana. That's a dangerous game to play.
Right.
And blew their cover. One message that the FBI recovered from her laptop, she turned over the real name of someone, and the Cubans said, we were waiting for him with open arms. It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
The American operative was not believed to have been harmed or imprisoned, but it clearly blew whatever program we were running there.
Sure.
So she turned over those real names. She also revealed the names of everyday folks that were throughout the U.S. government working on anything having to do with Cuba. That could have been hundreds of names. That's helpful to Cuba. That's who they're going to go target. They need to know those folks. She also, it's just 17 years of downloading and then uploading classified documents. That's a lot. And she had, I was talking to a CIA officer who said she had much broader access than we would ever have had at CIA. She was given a lot of latitude to poke her nose in a lot of different areas. So she turned over just volumes and volumes of material to the Cubans. And then finally, she also revealed a program. It was a stealth satellite program. It went by the code name Misty. And it was a multi-billion-dollar program that the U.S. government had been using to successfully spy on Russia, China, Iran, all of our enemies, and also Cuba. She was read into it and immediately turned that information over to the Cubans. The fear was the Cubans sell or share information with the Russians and others, and it's believed that she blew that program and ruined the effectiveness of this stealth satellite. So put it all together, she did a lot of damage in her nearly 17 years.
Yeah, and you put your finger on this too, that I think is really remarkable about her story, is that she's not just staying in the one lane of what she works on at DIA. She's able to dip into all of these other buckets, including, NRO satellite programs that she knows things about and is willing to basically share all of it. I mean, was there anything that she wasn't able to share, or was she basically like, I'm an open book for Cuba?
I'm not aware of anything where she said, this is too sensitive. Right. And in fact...
Or give me more money or something.
Right. Well, she barely took any money. She took a couple grand in her 17 years. She was an ideological spy. She took some money for expenses, basically. That was it. No, I mean, flashing forward to the end of her career, right before she was arrested, she was brought in after 9/11 and was given targeting information for Afghanistan. And she has said that she was willing to provide that information to the Cubans as well, which is obviously extremely frightening.
These are targets the U.S. was going to bomb in Afghanistan to go after the Taliban and al-Qaeda.
Absolutely, right. And, so if that is the case, there really are no bounds for what she would not have provided.
She's able to do this for, as you said, 17 years. Where along this timeline do authorities start to suspect they have a mole? When is the first inkling that there is someone who's providing information?
The National Security Agency, the NSA, realized in approximately 1998 that there was a problem. They had gained access and the ability to decode communications from the Cubans, shortwave radio communications from the Cubans to their handlers in the U.S., and provided those clues to the FBI in approximately 98. They were very specific. As an example, there was discussion of, quote, Agent S, that later turned out to be Montes. They knew Agent S had been in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, within a several-week period. And the NSA turned this over to the FBI, which, as you said, is the agency that investigates and can arrest spies in the U.S. There was other very detailed information that they had shared. It was first laid out at a big meeting with lots of FBI brass and NSA there. There's an NSA analyst who I interviewed. She's now retired. I created a pseudonym for her because she does not want her name used, and I call her Elena Valdez. Elena was at this first meeting when the FBI was briefed, and she walked away thinking, I've done my duty. The FBI, the premier investigative agency in the U.S., has this, they're going to chase it. And by the way, I didn't just say there appears to be a spy within the U.S. intelligence community. I gave them really detailed clues. Put it together, they've got to be able to figure out who this is. More than 2 years goes by, and the FBI has really not gotten anywhere. They believe it's a man. Their presumption, their hunch is that it's probably someone from the CIA, but they just have not moved the ball very much. And Elena, who's responsible for providing this information, is not getting any feedback whatsoever from the FBI. She's getting frustrated, and she's kind of like a whistleblower type mentality, so she's pushing a lot more maybe than the average bear would. At one point, someone from the Bureau tells her, it turns out erroneously, this case has been closed. And it may be that someone said that just to get her off of their back.
Leave us alone. Stop calling.
Yeah, but it's not true. The case was not closed. When she hears that and realizes 2 years has gone by, nothing's happening, the case is closed. I forgot to mention, Elena is Cuban American. She was forced to leave Cuba as a 6-year-old girl with her family. They resettled in Miami. And she can't stand the Cuban regime. So she's got a kind of personal motivation to try to figure this out, and she's a patriotic American working for the NSA. When she hears that the case supposedly is closed, she says to herself, not on my watch, I am going to pursue this. Somewhat coincidentally, she runs into some investigators from the DIA, where we later learn Ana actually is employed. The DIA had an intelligence capability and a pretty good unit that was looking at Cuba. Elena never knew that before. She decides to go over there with the guise being, I want to meet and greet. I don't know much about DIA. I'm going to come with a couple of my people, show us around. Mm-hmm. She does that, and very briefly, she says to, his name is Chris Simmons, who she was meeting with, I'm actually not here for meet and greet. Can you find us a skiff? I got to tell you something. And pulls him aside. She's got a couple of folks there and starts pulling out documents and says, I am not here to go on a tour. I need to tell you what's going on with a case that the FBI has had for a long time and is getting nowhere on. And she lays out a couple of the details. Chris brings in his boss. The boss gets read in as well. And they realize there's very specific information here. And it seems to them like maybe this Agent S, who's unidentified, maybe this person works in the military. They then involve a kind of mole hunter within DIA. His name is Scott Carmichael. They bring Scott in. Scott has a couple of these clues, and he's punching them into his database. And in literally minutes, based on this, including the fact that this spy has been to Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, within a couple-week period, Scott figures out that this has got to be Ana Montes. Her name flashes on his screen, along with other folks. He knew that name already. He had interviewed her several years earlier when a colleague of his had expressed some concern about her and how she was poking her nose into too many places and some other behavior that was suspicious. When he sees her name flashing on his computer screen, he said to himself, it's got to be her. Everything is coming together. Scott then works over the next few weeks with this NSA analyst completely behind the back of the FBI. They are not aware of this. And when they
really off the books. Yeah.
Off the books. And when they find out about it, they are furious. The FBI threatens to prosecute Elena for sharing this information. The NSA is not too pleased either. She's worried. Elena becomes worried she's going to be fired or imprisoned. Mm-hmm. But the DIA and Scott Carmichael kind of work past that. They work with the FBI and convince the FBI that Ana Montes is the person.
Which is convincing them that it's not whoever they might think it is. They have to also disabuse the FBI of the leads that they're already onto, essentially.
Including the fact that they believed it was a man based on some of the NSA clues. And it's very rare for women to spy. It's about 9% of all recent spy cases have been women. So Scott Carmichael is in meeting with the FBI, trying to convince them that he's identified on his own this suspect. The FBI at first, all they want to do is talk about the leak on this case. Who knows too much about it? how did you learn about this? And they're very angry at first. Ultimately, they work it out. They develop more clues, and the FBI becomes convinced to open first a preliminary investigation and then a full field investigation into Ana Montes as a possible Cuban recruit.
And that's really the moment whenever the FBI opens a full field investigation, that's what we think of, right, as sort of they're zeroing in on somebody. They might go get the FISA warrant like they did in her case to be able to surveil her, to monitor her. So talk a little bit about her family in this period too, because as you mentioned when we first heard it out, there's a strong law enforcement contingent that is running through this family that has amidst their ranks this, then undiscovered extraordinary spy. So talk about her siblings.
The amazing thing to me, and I've been really researching this for about 15 years, but as I was working on the book, I figured out the timing of all this. Ana goes to New York on that trip that I mentioned to meet the Cuban intelligence officer, and it's late 84, and she decides, I'm going to help the Cubans. Weeks later, 1 to 2 weeks later, Sister Lucy was working selling women's blouses at Hex in the Baltimore area.
Old department store, not around anymore.
Right. She gets into an argument with her dad. She's living with her father. She gets into an argument and she says, I got to get out of here. I got to find something else. She looks in the paper and sees a classified ad for translators. She's like, well, I speak Spanish, I speak English, and it's for the FBI. She applies and she is accepted. The FBI says, we have a job for you, but it's in Miami. She says, I'm going to take it. So excited. I can't wait to tell Ana. Now, remember, at the time, Ana's working in the Justice Department. So these are sister agencies.
Right.
And so Lucy, previously selling women's blouses, now calls her sister to say, I've got great news. I just got hired by the FBI. Ana is almost catatonic when she hears this news. She tells Lucy, this is a horrible idea. I don't like the guys I've met at the FBI. I really don't think this is a good plan for you. And Lucy was just confused by it. Why? This is a great move for me.
Be happy for me.
Why aren't you happy for me? She could not understand it. So within, just a week or two of Ana deciding to spy, her little sister all of a sudden is going to join the FBI, and she does. She becomes a translator with the FBI based in Miami. The Miami field office is the main place where the FBI is looking for Cuban spies. So it was not a happy coincidence for Ana.
Yeah, and she's really, she's, to put it plainly, nervous that her sister is crossing into the domain in which she is spying.
Correct.
She's fearful of the idea that her sister could eventually be part of an organization that starts hunting her. I guess.
Right. Then Lucy's there. She's working on it's Florida in the 80s. It was almost all drug cases, cocaine cases. Yeah. That's what she's working on.
Very much the Miami Vice kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah. But she meets a guy there who also is at the FBI, and his name is Chris. They get married. So now you've got two family members in the FBI. A couple years go by. Lucy's really doing well at her job, and she hears that the FBI is doing a lot of recruiting, and they're looking for, especially for minority candidates. She thinks of her sister-in-law, Joan, who was Korean American and was working at kind of a dead-end job in Pennsylvania, really bright woman. She calls Joan and says, would you ever be interested in becoming an FBI special agent? They may be interested in you. Joan thinks for about 3 seconds and says, absolutely, that sounds great. Joan goes to tell her husband, his name is Tito, that is Ana and Lucy's brother. Tito at the time is in seminary. Tito is preparing to become a priest. Joan goes to him and says, I'm going to apply to be an FBI agent. Well, what do you think? And he says, well, I think it's great for you, but guess what? I don't want to be a priest anymore. I want to be an FBI agent. So, And they do. They ultimately both become FBI special agents. They're based in Atlanta. So within a couple of years, very coincidentally, Ana has a brother and a sister-in-law who are FBI special agents, a sister who's an FBI translator, and a brother-in-law also working for the FBI. 4 family members in no time at all.
And it's an amazing thing. I mean, obviously, Ana Montes made decisions that, I think her family's actually been out with a statement this as recently as this week or last couple of weeks saying, it was treasonous what she did. But she grew up in a household in which clearly there was a strong sense of right and wrong, obviously discipline in the extreme that went into the abusive area. But I mean, what do you think about it? I mean, could you take these siblings and say they were all very much committed to what their idea of the right thing to do was? I mean, those are the kinds of people that, go into government. I mean, and Ana on paper, was perfect for, a role at DIA or at DOJ where she starts out. And there's kind of an ideological commitment, a belief that seems to run very strongly in that family. In Ana's case, it went obviously in a very different direction.
Virtually the entire family was employed by the government.
Yeah.
The father's in the Army. Then he went into private practice, ironically, as a Freudian psychiatrist. But the mother worked for the IRS and, I believe, Social Security. So she was with the government. And then Tito and Joan and Lucy. They're all working for the U.S. government. What Lucy says, because, look, These kids are all raised by the same father, many of the same impressions of this very difficult father. But Lucy says, look, I'm loyal. I love the United States. I'm patriotic. I had problems with my father as well, although I love him. I didn't end up as a spy. Mm-hmm. So this is something within Ana. It's a combination of factors. It's politics. It's personal. It's who she is and how she decided to react to this, to what she thought was the atrocities of the Reagan administration, and probably, subconsciously a reaction against her father. But she made a decision that is obviously very different from what her siblings decided to do and how they reacted to the stress of growing up with a difficult, abusive father.
She's such a contrast to a spy. Really, one of her contemporaries, Robert Hansen, who was ultimately arrested not much longer after Ana is arrested, who wanted more money from his Soviet handlers, wanted respect. Was this incredible narcissist and very insecure in so many ways. But she just strikes me as such an interesting contrast in him. Opposed to him, around the same time, somebody who was clearly not doing it for the money. How much was it important to her that she had the respect of her handlers and that they thought she was doing a good job?
Very. She didn't want to be thought of as, like a messenger woman, basically. She wanted to be treated with respect. She was a high-ranking analyst on the U.S. side, and she wanted that same respect. And the Cubans gave it to her. They gave her a lot more latitude that they probably would have with other spies. And as I said, she was very analytical in what she presented to them, and was just super helpful in many times in the history of the relations between Cuba and America. In her in her time of spying, she was extremely helpful.
When did you become aware of her story? Was it when you were working as a journalist and covering law enforcement? And when does she pop on your radar?
I heard about Ana Montes when she was arrested on September 21st, 2001. At the time, I was a producer at NBC News, teamed with Pete Williams, and we were covering 9/11. That was our job, and it was a chaotic, busy, scary moment, as you recall, Shane. And I remember reading about the arrest and just thinking, we just don't have the bandwidth to do it, and it was a little off topic.
Yeah.
As interesting as a Cuban spy is. About a week later, a college roommate and buddy of mine called and said, "Did you see the Ana Montes arrest?" And I said, yeah. And I go, "Why you mention that?" He goes, "She bought my condo." And I realized that I had spent an enormous amount of time in that apartment in the Cleveland Park area on Macomb Street in Washington. And my friend John had sold it to Ana. It made a connection for me, and it stayed with me. A couple years later, I decided to reach out to the investigators and to the FBI about this, and through that process, I met Lucy Montes, who was still at the FBI at the time, and was, gracious enough to talk to me. She had not talked to any reporters, and give me an interview. And I assembled all that, and I wrote a long piece for the Washington Post magazine that came out in 2013, the now late, great Washington Post magazine.
Yes, R.I.P. Yeah. Why do you think that she decided to talk to you? Why did Lucy trust you with that story when I imagine there were probably other journalists who tried to get to her? And she's still in the government at the time.
She was still in the government, yeah. I think my timing was good. Several years had passed since the arrest. Lucy, she channeled her anger about this case through me and through the article. She said some pretty rough things about Ana in this article, and she wanted Ana to read what she had to say about her. One of the things that Lucy shared was a letter that she wrote to Ana in prison. And basically what happened was, after the arrest, the family was so upset, but they realized, well, why pile on? We're not going to beat her up over it. She pled guilty, and they let her know how they felt, but they didn't try to make her feel horrible about it. Lucy waited and kind of held her tongue for a long time, but they got into an argument once when Ana criticized Lucy for not being nice enough to their mother, and she said, Ana from prison said to Lucy, "You should probably see a shrink for your anger management issues." Well, that was it.
Just not our dad.
That was it, and Lucy just thought, that is too much. Now I'm going to tell her how I feel. And she wrote her a letter that really expressed her anger, and she shared that with me, and I reported on it. And so I think that was it. The timing was good, but Lucy Montes wanted the world to know, my sister did something horrible. Let's not let that define who we are, our family. Our family is full of really successful doctors and patriotic Americans, and I don't want the rest of the world to think that Ana Montes should define who we are.
So you find out about her story, obviously, when you're at NBC, and it's this incredibly busy time. How did you get into journalism? And were you always covering law enforcement and those kinds of issues? Where'd you start out?
I got into journalism. I went to Northwestern, started taking some classes at Medill, and just fell in love with it.
Pretty good journalism school.
Yeah. And I had always loved writing, but didn't really know that much about journalism, and jumped right in. I'm from beautiful Trenton, New Jersey. I moved home after school and talked my way into a job at the Trenton Times.
Nice.
And was off to the races. But when I moved to Washington, I worked for U.S. News and World Report, and I started covering law enforcement there. And then once I was at NBC, that was the full-time gig, is covering Justice, FBI, and a little bit the Supreme Court as well.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, I mean, you mentioned Pete Williams, who recently retired, really one of the most beloved reporters on the criminal justice, FBI, DOJ beat, but did it a long, long time. What does a producer do for people who don't understand that relationship between a kind of a reporter, correspondent, somebody who's on the air like Pete was, and what was your role in that partnership?
I'll tell you what typically it is, and then I'll tell you what it is with Pete Williams.
Okay.
Typically, the producer really is the reporter. If you're teamed with a producer and a correspondent, many times the producer is really the frontline reporter who learns the news and chases interviews and assembles stories. Pete is so incredible at what he does, and really a perfectionist too, that he did a lot of the work that a typical producer would do, which made working for him, just a total pleasure.
Yeah.
But having said that, I had covered the FBI a lot.
Yeah.
I had my own sources. So I was very much like a frontline person for NBC News, which was primarily we reported for the nightly news, the Today Show, and MSNBC on the biggest story ever, the 9/11 attacks. And it was just an incredible and stressful period.
Yeah. What do you remember about where you were on 9/11?
Remember it like it was yesterday. I was in the backyard talking to a contractor, and my wife ran outside and told me what had happened, and I went running into the bureau. Mm-hmm. Pete is from Wyoming, and he was hiking in a very remote area of Wyoming.
Is that right?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
And it took him about 24 hours to come up for air and realize what had happened.
Wow.
And so that put me in an even more important position, because I had the contacts with the FBI. I don't know if you remember this at the time, but normally you can call into the FBI. They have a press office. We all knew the spokespeople who worked there. After 9/11, the phones were a total disaster. You couldn't use the phones to call the FBI. It's
impossible to make a call.
I set up camp at the Audubon Pan on 10th Street, right across from the FBI. I had my laptop there, and that was my office. It's like a cliche, I guess, with the FBI going in to buy donuts every day.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I got so much information from FBI officials going in there to grab coffee, and I would talk to them there and developed a lot of information.
Yeah.
And obviously had other sources that I could call, but it was as chaotic as it was on the news side. It was obviously much worse on the law enforcement side, trying to figure out what had happened. Will there be another attack? Are there other folks who were still here who were involved? And it was clearly the biggest investigation in the FBI history at that time.
And you covered the anthrax attacks and investigation too, right?
Correct.
Which was another huge story.
Yes, the anthrax attacks and then the DC sniper. It all happened around the same time.
It is, looking back on that, it's extraordinary that all three of those things were happening pretty much simultaneously, at least in terms of the FBI investigation. But even in the case of the anthrax and the sniper attacks, not knowing who the culprits were for quite some time.
It was stressful to live in D.C.
Yeah,
at
no,
that
it really
time.
was.
Yeah.
People were afraid to stop at gas stations and open mail.
Right. And, of course, the Pentagon was attacked on 9/11, and then you have the snipers and the anthrax. It was a lot. I have a friend who sold his house right in that period, moved to Vermont, never came back.
Forget it. Just get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's an interesting kind of 9/11 connection, I suppose, in Ana Montes' case, when we talked about how she had access to the targets that the military might use to attack in Afghanistan and al-Qaeda. And tell this story, because that ends up actually lighting a fire that leads pretty quickly to her arrest.
So she was allowed to stay in place at the DIA. And they
knew who she was at that point.
Correct. She's under investigation, and a key piece of evidence, as you said, the FBI gets special approval from the FISA court, Foreign Surveillance Act court, to do a surreptitious entry into her apartment in May of 2001. And when they do, they find these communications on her laptop to and from the Cubans. And that really, that is what convicted her ultimately. So the FBI, and in turn, some people, limited people within the DIA, know about this investigation, and they know that they have a Cuban spy working at DIA. To his credit, the then director of DIA, Admiral Thomas Wilson, decides, I'm going to keep her in place to assist the FBI, because the FBI wants, ideally, to find her meeting with the Cubans, passing a document. that would be much more incriminating than what they had. And Wilson says, okay, I'm going to allow this to happen, but report to me frequently and let me know how it's going. Then 9/11 happens. And by the way, Admiral Wilson is in the Pentagon. Here's the plane going by, and DIA employees are killed on that day. So this is both very personal for him, but if you run the DIA and our nation is at war, of course, with and about to bomb Afghanistan, and you run the DIA, that's your job. Your job is now to direct and tell the Pentagon where to bomb, how to bomb, that kind of thing, and provide military intelligence. So this is a very, very busy guy. He immediately realizes, we got to get Ana Montes out of here. And there are folks behind the scenes, because Ana was held in such high regard, she is promoted, and now she's put on a task force where she's going to be given access to our bombing targets in Afghanistan. And that was done by people who had no idea she was under investigation. Wilson learns about this. He learns that she's on this task force and that she's going to get this classified information on where we're going to bomb. And he's worried that she's going to turn it over to the Cubans, and who knows, maybe the Cubans will then sell it or give it to the Taliban. Mm-hmm. It was a big concern. So he goes to the FBI and says, guys, time is up. She needs to be arrested or fired. We have to get her out. I can't handle having a Cuban spy while I'm also dealing with this. So he communicates that to the FBI, and they agree. And they decide it's going to be Friday, September 21st. She's going to be arrested. And they put a plan together to arrest her at the DIA that day.
And it's a fairly dramatic scene, too, where they have, oxygen tanks standing by and like a nurse, right? Because they're worried if she has if she faints, if she has some kind of attack. But she is just cool as a cucumber.
She is indeed. They come up with a ruse. They bring her down to the Inspector General's office, supposedly to look into a problem with an employee. And they usher her into a conference room, and there, waiting for her, the two FBI case agents. And they introduced themselves, and they had a whole script where they were going to try to get her to talk and confess. And she was having none of it. She's a pretty sharp cookie, didn't buy it, and asked for a lawyer. And she kind of blanched, and she showed signs of a rash during this. She was obviously nervous. But she stood up and walked out of there, no problem whatsoever, with a lot of confidence. And they did. They had a nurse and CPR equipment waiting, and they didn't have to use any of it.
It's amazing. It's such a contrast to what we think of as, the moment with the FBI barges in with the guns and puts you under arrest, that it almost sounds polite. The way they pick her in.
They had a whole plan, and Steve McCoy was the lead case agent, said, it just it fell apart. It just didn't work at all.
Amazing. So she'll be getting out, on Friday. So by the time people hear this, she'll presumably have been out for a little under a week. What does she do now? I mean, she's been in jail 21 years, in prison 21 years. What does life look like for Ana Montes after she walks out of that federal prison?
Well, first of all, she'll be on probation for 5 years under pretty tight restrictions. Probation officer, checks of her computer usage, no contact with foreign agents, that sort of thing. She will likely move to Puerto Rico, where she has family, sympathetic family, and kind of reboot and get her life together. She does want to reunite with her mother. She's very close with her mother, who lives in southern Florida. So the family wants to put that together in a safe environment.
Yeah.
But I think that she's gonna be pretty quiet. She does not want to violate her agreement and return to prison. Say what you will about her crime, she has done hard time. Mm-hmm. She's lived in this prison within a prison called the admin unit within Carswell in Texas. It is a prison reserved for the most dangerous women in America. She lived close to Squeaky Fromm, of Manson family fame who tried to assassinate President Ford, an al-Qaeda terrorist who shot at FBI agents, a nurse who killed a number of patients using adrenaline, basically a serial murderer. And her one friend in prison was a woman named Lisa Montgomery, who committed a ghastly murder to steal a baby and was executed during the Trump administration. And that was her closest friend in prison. And I just say all that just to mention that her life and her situation was very, very difficult. She described it as living in an insane asylum for essentially 2 decades. I don't think she's going to do anything to jeopardize her freedom, her liberty in Puerto Rico or wherever she is to have to go back there.
Will you try to interview her?
I will make an attempt, but she's under a lot of restrictions. She would have to get the approval of both the FBI and DIA to do any kind of an interview. And based on what I've read from her prison letter, she's not a big fan of my work so far.
Explain why she wasn't given a life sentence.
She was eligible for the death penalty. She's a traitor, but she cut a very good deal with the government. And she had a good lawyer, Plato Kucheris.
Quite skilled defense attorney.
They negotiated a 25-year sentence for her. She will have done approximately 21 years when she gets out. But I think the government, the Justice Department, thought, let's go for the sure thing here. It's a woman. She's in D.C. Who knows what will happen with the jury? They never found her giving a document or meeting with a Cuban. So the most incriminating evidence that they had was what was on her laptop. And that I do think that it was very incriminating, but I just don't think they wanted to risk a trial. And also, anytime you go to trial, you have to expose, by nature, you run the risk of exposing a lot of classified information. So they agreed on a deal, 25-year deal. I think she got a good deal because if you look at Robert Hansen, the FBI Russian spy, Rick Ames, who was at CIA, or even Kendall Myers, who was a State Department employee and a Cuban spy, they all got life terms. They're in Supermax. Ana got a 25-year sentence, out after 21 years and 3 months for good behavior. She's 65 years old. She can have a long, productive life.
Was part of it, was there thinking that, Hansen, the information he provided led to the capture and execution of a number of people in the Soviet Union. Was there a sense that as bad as what Ana Montes did, it didn't rise to the level of Hansen, who, basically agreed to tell everything he knew in exchange for not getting the death penalty? It was basically tell us everything and we'll let you live.
I think so. I think that's the case. Look, also with Ana, she had to agree to cooperate with the government, and she was debriefed for months and months by every agency you can imagine.
Which must have been that must have just been actually quite hard for her, considering her ideological commitment to spy because she objected to U.S. government policy.
It was excruciating for her. She hated the process. She was difficult to deal with. The FBI agents who had to accompany her said she was extremely unpleasant. But she provided enough information to check the boxes. Very few people think that she revealed everything that she knew, but she provided enough to satisfy her deal with the government.
Is there a chance that she could try to go to Cuba and live out her days there?
She could. I would be very surprised. She has family here.
Sure.
And that's a one-way ticket.
Right. She would never come back. But
correct.
Do you have any sense of whether or not the Cuban government, now that she's out, should we expect to hear a communique from them, reminding everybody what a great job she did for them and how proud they are of her work?
They did after she was sentenced. And it's very rare for them to even acknowledge any government to acknowledge anyone who spied for them. They gave her a shout out essentially afterwards, which was unusual. We've not heard much from the Cubans about Ana. There is support among some Cuban people and also some folks in Puerto Rico who believe in her cause, who have been very supportive, and there are all kinds of Facebook affinity pages for her.
Yeah. There are people online who still, really argue for her as being, essentially
like a political prisoner.
Yeah, political prisoner, exactly. That what she did was righteous. But it will be, because she is, so relatively young. It will be fascinating if she actually does speak, that we have a convicted, very high-level, successful spy who is now free and out in the public. You can't get interviews with Robert Hansen.
Right.
He's essentially in a cage. That's going to be really, really unusual, isn't it?
It will be. And, she has said that she doesn't have an interest in that right now, but
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And also after 5 years, once her probation is over, I think, maybe she'll feel a little more free to speak at that point.
Right. Safe to say she will not be getting a security clearance again or coming to work for the U.S. government.
I don't think so.
What was the thing that surprised you the most in researching this book? Because you've been a journalist for a long, long time. You've been digging into this story, like you said, for 15 years. Was there something that you came away with that was either surprising to you or was sort of the big, takeaway in your mind in all of this?
I guess the biggest surprise for me was the NSA role in this. I mentioned Scott Carmichael, who was at DIA. Scott wrote a book about this a couple years after Ana pled guilty. And he mentioned in it a character that he called Big Mouth, who played an early role in providing some information. It never said the NSA. No one ever talked about NSA. And in researching the book, I realized that NSA played such a big role, and then this woman, Elena, a Cuban American, was really a linchpin in this and pushing the case forward, riding the FBI, going behind their back to another agency to push, make sure this case did not get forgotten. And always kept in mind, there's someone out there who is in the U.S. government who's providing information to Cuba. And she just would not stop until she figured that out. That was the biggest discovery for me.
Well, it is our tradition here on Chatter that the last question to our guest, I reach in here to the Chatter box and ask you a pre-selected question at random. So this is our version of the Freudian psychology here. This is actually very on topic. Tell us your favorite or least favorite spy or political thriller movie or TV show.
Oh, okay. Love it. I've got to go with All the President's Men.
It's great.
It's maybe it's a cliche for a journalist, but it really inspired me. The whole story did, but I just fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. Have had the privilege to meet Bob Woodward. And I love the look and feel of that movie, and I love the respect with which it shows the reporting process. Mm-hmm. And it had a very big impact on me as a young guy.
Is that something that made you want to become a journalist?
Trying to think when that came out. I was like
75. It would have come out, and then maybe later, maybe 76.
Yeah, it definitely played a role for sure. It feels a little cheesy saying it, but I think there's probably a big generation of journalists who got into this line of business because of that.
You know what's amazing to me about that movie too, and I agree with that. I love it, and I usually end up watching it again like once a year. There are so few movies about journalism that actually get it right about what reporting is and what editing and writing is, and that absolutely got it. I mean, it's no surprise. I mean, Woodward and Bernstein cooperated. I mean, famously down to like the newsroom Robert Redford made of the replica. That is what the old Washington Post newsroom looked like. But it really is striking to me. I don't know about you, but just how few movies about journalism get it right. It's the same thing with movies about intelligence, actually. There's so few movies that actually get it right. There's an idea of what the reporter is and what he or she does that is just so often not really how it works.
The other one that I think there's a parallel is Spotlight.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, where it's the process, the iterative process of journalism. You kind of see the ups and downs and the chance that is part of it as well. And I experienced that in writing this book. You just, sometimes you call people blind. You have no idea if they're going to pick up, if they're going to cooperate, and there's a little sales job that goes into getting people to talk to you and to open up. And that discovery, the chase is unbelievable. That's what I love about journalism.
Yeah, and you worked in print and in TV. I mean, how different is, let's take TV journalism just as a thought here to close on, how different is TV journalism than when you were working at NBC and covering 9/11 and these stories? How much of it's changed?
I don't know if it's changed all that much, but what I went from print to TV, it's so much more collaborative in TV.
Which kind of has to be, doesn't it? Yeah,
which can be really nice. There's dozens of people working on a story versus print. It's generally you and your editor, and that's
right.
And that's it. There's something nice about that too. The pride of ownership, but I love the team aspect of broadcast journalism was terrific.
Yeah. Is there another book in you, do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is yet. But I did learn. I loved the process, the reporting probably more than the writing, but I even liked the writing, and I absolutely want to do it again.
That's great. Well, Jim Popkin, congratulations. It's a great read. It really is a terrific book. Name Blue Wren. People should check it out. You can now buy it everywhere books are sold. It's a fascinating story. I hope that Ana Montes will actually talk to you maybe at some point. It would be amazing. But thanks for coming on the show and talking to us about this great spy caper, which has more chapters ahead, it looks like. So we'll see.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just absolutely enjoyed it, Shane.
Great. Thanks for coming on. That was Chatter, a production of Lawfare and Goat Rodeo. Please subscribe to the podcast and find us on Twitter at That Was Chatter.